Yes.
So, good morning for everyone, to everyone. Good morning, Lucie and Knut Taraldsen. Good morning to our Brazilian audience as well. Thank you very much for being here for the first activity of the 5th Brazilian Colloquium of Morphology. Okay. Professor Maria Cristina and I, Professor Teresa Cristina, would like to express our pleasure to see you here. Okay. A special thanks goes to our speakers today who kindly accepted to deliver this course, even in this strange format and weird format, okay? Supposedly normal nowadays. Before we start the course, Thais will introduce our two course speakers. So, Thais.
Hello, everyone. So I'd like to briefly introduce our two speakers for today, starting with Professor Lucie. So Professor Lucie holds a PhD in Theoretical and Slavic Linguistics from Princeton University, and she is currently a researcher in the Department of Czech Language at Masaryk University in the Czech Republic. Her work has focused on the syntax and argument structure of mostly Slavic, Romance, and Bantu languages. Most recently, she has also been doing research on syncretism patterns in Czech. Professor Tarald, in turn, is a senior researcher at the Center for Advanced Study in Theoretical Linguistics, CASL, at the University of Tromsø in Norway. He is also a researcher at Masaryk University. His research focuses on theoretical syntax, both in the nominal and in the verbal domains, with special emphasis on Scandinavian, Germanic, and Romance syntax, as well as the morphosyntax of Southern Bantu languages, all within the nanosyntax framework. So these are our guests for today. We are very excited to have you all here. We'd like just to remind our participants to please keep your cameras and microphones closed during the whole session. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat and we will ask them for you, just to keep the connection as stable as possible, right? And this session is going to be organized in 3 blocks of 45 minutes. So we have a few breaks between each session so that everybody can go to the bathroom or get some water, okay? So we have breaks in between the course, but it should be around 4 hours long so that you can plan. All right, I think that's it. Please, Lucie Tarald, if you want to start.
Okay. So, hello, everybody. Do you hear me now? I guess yes, right? And I'll share the screen. And I turn it So I hope that it works now also. Yes, it does work. I have an extra screen here, so that's why I'm peeking. So again, thank you very much for inviting us. We are very excited to do that. But again, as I said before, it's very important that you stop me or ask a question the moment you don't understand. Because believe me, when Tarald takes over, it's gonna be tough. Promise.
I think it maybe just a suggestion. Maybe it's better for you to mute the YouTube that you have opened.
Yes, so absolutely. Sorry. But it is mute. Then I just leave it because I hear that's disturbing. Okay, sorry then. But now do you see the screen? And I'll just go through the slides slowly. Okay, so the research question that we'll look at is which piece of syntactic structure can be replaced by a lexical item, right? And by the end of this session, you will hopefully kind of re-evaluate the idea that you will re-evaluate the classical answer, that is that lexical items are uniquely associated with terminal nodes, that is with constituents or heads, that is heads, with simply heads, right? So this is the syntax 101. That's what you learn. Okay, the heads correspond to morphemes, right? Now, today, what we want to kind of make you think about is the nanosyntactics answer. That is, lexical items spell out phrases. In fact, lexical items are large trees. Lexical items, morphemes, and lexical items generally, like, you know, you're like a dog, for example, or right, do not correspond to to terminal nodes, but they are huge trees by themselves. Okay, so this is the take-home message which you now learn, and now let me convince about that. Let me convince you about that, or try to. Okay. Okay, we start with the classical story, right? So the classical story, and by classical we take the classical view to be held by DM, distributed morphology, right? So if you have, suppose that you want to say boys, right? So you have your noun boy, and then you have the number, plural in this case. And then if you live in the DM world, then you know, okay, this is a head and it's a boy, and this is a head, meaning plural. And then this is the plural, and the morpheme for the plural is S. So when you put them together, then you get boys. Cool, right? Okay. Now the question comes, what about men, right? Boys is nice and easy and it's compositional, but what about men, right? And for that, a DM has a response, and that's called fusion. Fusion is an operation that that kind of takes care of the portmanteau morphemes in this case, right? So, but notice one thing: fusion cannot apply freely, right? But it has to apply when you have a lexical item like men. When you have a man plus S, then you know that you have to go through fusion to get men. But in many cases, it has to be blocked. That is, for when you have a lexical item boy, then you know that you don't want to get fusion, right? So there's a kind of, well, I don't know how happy you are about that. So there's the generalization. When you have N0 and the num, zero, they must fuse if and only if there happens to be a lexical item capable of spelling out the terminal created by fusion, that is for men. That is, so if you have to do fusion only when you know that you have a good lexical item for which you have to do it. Otherwise, don't do it. So the question is, how do you know, right? Now the DM has, this is like, I'll keep it hanging, but we'll come back to that, right? So now the DM has the subset principle for lexicalization, right? So we'll go through this very slowly, and it's because of me, because I always stumble here. So
cool.
So the subset principle.
Just read it.
Yeah, a morpheme A with the lexical entry A with the syntactic features, there is a set of syntactic features F, can replace a terminal T associated with the feature set G if and only if F is a subset of G. Okay, so now I'll go through that slowly again, and I'll try to parse it. Okay, so a morpheme, A is a morpheme, right? And it corresponds to syntactic features. I took the liberty to represent syntactic features as veggies, vegetables. So this lexical item A, the morpheme A, corresponds to the syntactic features, which I call parsley and squash. I can call them x1,
Just go on.
x2, right? But this is just for us to be on to get that, right? So then I have the lexical item, and then I have a terminal T. Here is the terminal T, and that terminal T is associated with the syntactic feature G, right? And again, in the game we play, the G is a set of syntactic features, and this is onion, parsley, and squash, right? Syntactic features, right? And now the subset principle says that a morpheme morpheme A can replace the terminal T only if the feature set of A is a subset of G. Now, G is onion, parsley, and squash. F, now I know, is parsley and squash. I look at them and I see, oh, F is a subset of G, right? Parsley and squash, score, yes. What does it mean? It means that in DM, according to the subset principle, A can replace the terminal T in this case.
You mean F can? No, okay, no. No, sorry.
I mean A.
No, yeah, you're right.
Sorry, Tarald is helping me
you're
here.
right, I got lost.
Sorry. Yeah, so so again, the lexical item A can replace this terminal T because the lexical item A has syntactic features that are subset of the syntactic feature of the features of the terminal that they want to replace. Okay, subset is the key word now, right? The lexical item in a certain way is smaller. The set of syntactic features associated with the lexical item is smaller than the features associated, the set of, sorry again here, right? So the set of syntactic features associated with the lexical item is smaller than
equal to.
Now Tarald helps actually helpfully. Is smaller or equal to sorry, equal to the set of syntactic features associated with the terminal T. Okay, okay. Now, and given the way we go, right, I added a set H, right? A set H is aubergine, onion, parsley, and squash. And as you see, this set is superset of the set G and also superset of the set F, right? And I did it on purpose, and I mark it in gray because from now on, everything that is gray is good, because everything that is gray corresponds to nanosyntactic view. So just like a hint ahead of time, right? So what we have, the claim to which you now have to get used to is that lexical item, which has the set of syntactic features H, that is the big set of features, can lexicalize the syntactic structure here in nanosyntactic view. And in particular, it's actually the only way it can, right? So the set of lexical features, syntactic features that are associated with a lexical item is a superset of the thing which is going to be spelled out by the lexical item. So far, so good? Okay, so this was just a preview. And now we go back to the DM, hence we go back to subset. Okay, so we are in the worldview where A is parsley and squash is a subset of the syntactic structure, onion, parsley, and squash. Hence, F, that is A, can lexicalize T. Good? Good. Okay. Now, now we go back to the derivation, right? Now we go back to men and boys, right? So we have this syntactic structure. We saw it before. This is boy. This is S, the noun, and the plural marker, the number. So I'll read it so that I know what it says. Presumably, the new terminal created by fusion, and fusion is the terminal created by fusing these two nodes into a single head. Then, because what we actually are after is to lexicalize, and in DM we can lexicalize only heads, only terminals, right?
DM.
Now he was not helpful. Yes, I see a question.
So you can only lexicalize after the fusion.
You have to lexicalize after the fusion. So that's it. And we'll get back to it, right? Because
That's
you sort of have to.
Good point.
Perfectly good. Yes, thanks a lot. We'll get to it later on. Yes, you have to look. Do you have? Yes, good. So now we have the fusion that took these two terminals and fused them into a single terminal. So now we can lexicalize it in the DM in
by
principle.
A single morpheme.
By a single morpheme. Right. So, but then the subset principle,
Yes.
in orange is DM, in gray it's nanosyntax. The subset principle entails that any lexical item that can lexicalize n, just the head n, or the head num, can also lexicalize the outcome of the fusion. That is, either boy or S can actually lexicalize boys. That is what should come out as boys, right?
By the subset.
By this. Sorry, I thought it was helpful, but now I'm a little, confused what Tarald's comments. So
no, the only comment is that the terminal you obtained by fusing n and num, right, will presumably, as an effect of fusion, be associated with a set of features which should be the union of the set of features associated with n and the set of features associated with the number head, right? So the fused node should have a feature set which is the union of the two separate feature sets, right?
And for that, we have actually a nice picture here, right? So I'll show you what it's supposed to be like, right? So we are still basically at the previous slide with the same structure. We have the noun boy, and they are what was the word? Not fused. They are.
They're not fused.
They are merged. Sorry, merged together into a phrase, right? And so we have the feature sets. Now we don't have parsley anymore. We have the feature sets. So we have for the n, we have x1, x2, xn, and for the number we have y1, y2, ym, right? And m are two different numbers. So these are the feature sets. Now the feature set. That's exactly what Tarald just said. So what we want to do is to find out what is the feature set of the fused head, and it's kind of inevitable that it's a union of the feature sets associated with the two heads, right? So if this is the set of features associated with n, and this is the set of features associated with this head, then their union is the set of all is a set with all the features from the previous sets. Okay? Okay. Now we come to the, this is still the same thing. Now, when we have the lexical entries, now suppose that the lexical entries are boy and S, right? And boy, presumably, according to the subset principle, remember, has to be able to spell out this terminal, has to be a subset of the features associated with the head, right? That is, boy has to be the morpheme boy has to correspond to a set of syntactic feature a prime, let's call it A prime, which is a subset of the set of features associated with n, right? So, and this is, I just marked it as x2 to xn. And as you notice, it's a smaller, right? Because the n has the features including x1, and boy does not have x1. Hence, it's a subset. And the same for s, right? Which goes for the number, right? So we have the set of features associated with the number y1 to ym, and s, to be able to spell out that, must be a subset. The syntactic features associated with s must be a subset of the features associated with the num, right? So hence, again, I took it from y2. This is just an example. This is not about, real features. I could have used
Just
also parsley.
Just
yeah. Right. So now we established that the lexical entries for these morphemes are subsets of the features associated with the heads, which they are supposed to spell out. Okay. Now I'll probably just read what I have just said, right? Presumably, the new terminal created by fusion should be associated with the union of the feature sets associated with N0 and num0. Clear. But then, subset principle entails that any lexical item that can lexicalize N0 or num0 can also lexicalize the outcome of fusing N0 and num0, that is just boy or S, should be able to mean boys. Are we clear on that? We saw that. Good, yeah. And again, I'll just read this. So it seems necessary to stipulate that the application of fusion is controlled by the lexicon, in the sense that fusion can apply only and only if the lexicon contains a morpheme associated with the feature set with members from both feature sets associated with the fused terminal, for example. So okay. So when we have, now we are coming to the conditions under which fusion can happen. So we have lexical items, lexical entries like this. So we have a man, associated with the features F, feature set F. We have S associated with the feature set G, and then we have a special lexical item, men, associated with the feature set H, right? And as you see here on this is actually shown on in the tree, right? So this is what we saw before, except we saw boys, and then we had the different feature sets. Now we have these feature set F for men and S for G, and then for men, for the plural, we have a feature set H, and H is nothing else than the union of the feature set F and feature set G. That's the same thing, right before, right? So if men has the entry, well, that's exactly what we had here. So we have the lexical entries, and we have the sets, and H is the union of F and G. And now the N is the feature sets associated with, F is the feature set associated with N, and G is this feature set associated with num0. And if they can fuse, then the new terminal can be lexicalized by men, but not by men. Simple idea, right? So when you come here and you have this special lexical item, men, with the feature set H, then that lexical item gets precedence from the usual way you go. That is that you take boy and then S. When you have a fused version, then you have to take it, and that's actually a general principle called the elsewhere principle, right? And as you notice, it's in gray, and it's a very prominent principle used prominently in nanosyntax as well. But of course, it's not
formulated the same way.
Formulated that same way, and you find it under different formulation in different ways. But the idea is simple, right? So again, now, given a terminal T, we have a terminal T with the feature set F, And we have these lexical entries, right? So we have an A with G, and we have B with a feature set H, and we have G. Okay, and then G and H are both subsets of F. That's shown here in C. So we have G is a subset of F, and H is a subset of F. Now we are basically comparing two lexical items and decided which one gets to spell out the terminal, right? And the elsewhere principle said that, elsewhere principle says that A wins if and only if G is larger subset of F than S.
H.
Sorry.
Than H.
Than H. I'm so sorry. Too many letters. Sorry, but okay.
Move to nano.
I think we went through that, but let me try to do it slowly, right? So you have
nano.
Tarald pushes me to go to nano, but
yes, because time is running out.
Because oh, that's true. Time is running out. Sorry. So easy. Sorry. Right. Fusion. Okay. Now. We got the idea that the fusion must apply since we have the lexical item men, and that kind of entails that the elsewhere must take men rather than men and s. Okay. Now, this is very pretty and nice, except that there's a conceptual issue which was pointed out elsewhere. Elsewhere, I'm sure, but we cite Pavel Zaha's work, nanosyntax, of course, as you see in gray. So in DM, fusion is part of a set of morphological rules that are taken to apply before lexical insertion. That is, at the point of the derivation that the lexicon has not yet been consulted. In other words, you have to do fusion without knowing what kind of lexical items you have. And that's, how do you do that? You know that you have to do it for men, and you cannot do it for boys and girls and students and a million other words. But how do you know that when you don't know the lexical item yet, right? You see the problem. Now, this is yet another example how things could work. And this is sorry, you see that it's very obvious. So we have the lexical item red for Spanish in singular rojo.
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 It might have been Portuguese, but it worked as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you have for masculine singular, you have the lexical item. Here is the root, and then you have the masculine feature. For feminine, you have the feminine feature, and it's spelled out as O and A here. For plural, you have next to the gender morpheme, you have the number, right? And you get the spell out nice and easy. Now in Italian, for the singular, it works exactly the same way. For plural, however, what you have is a morpheme that is sort of like a fusion of the gender and the number, both in masculine and in feminine, different morphemes, right? So when you have the masculine and a plural, you fuse them and you get the morpheme E here and F for feminine. Now, in how do you deal with that in DM? Well, this is a kind of very important picture which you have to keep in your heads now. So in DM, set of features are associated with terminal nodes. That's what we saw previously, right? So you have a onion, parsley, and they are associated with the feature T, right? With the terminal T. Now in cartography, and that kind of a principle is a backbone of a nanosyntactic approach. Features are not bundles. Each feature gets its own projection, right? So there's one-to-one correspondence between syntactic features and terminal nodes, right? So they're not bundled. Each feature has its own projection, and that makes absolutely crucial difference, right? And of course, we built on work by Memo Cinque and Rizzi. Many people subscribe to that, right? So now then we come to the consequence, which is clear that the problem with men arises more widely because the number of morphemes spelling out the syntactic structure is generally smaller than the number of syntactic features involved, right?
Because the syntactic features are now each one of them an independent head in the structure.
Okay. Now we come to the phrasal lexicalization. Now we're going to see how you spell out things in nanosyntax, right? And you know where we go, and you will see it many times. But I really want to show you this here. Proposal by Michael Starke, blah blah. You read that. Now there is a lexical insertion targets syntactic phrasal constituents rather than terminals, right? So now we live in a world when things are different. First of all, lexical items are not bundles of features. Lexical items are syntactic structures, right? That follows from the way we see features. Features never bundle. Hence, when a lexical item is able to spell out syntactic structure, it must be a syntactic structure itself. So we have these two lexical items for men. For the plural, we have whatever is NP. It says NP. It could be N. Tarald will tell you afterwards.
No, I won't.
For men, we have the NP, and that's the concept of a man. Men. Norwegian blends in. Sorry about that. So these two are the lexical items. And then when in syntax you build a structure like this, then you go to the lexicon, and as Michael Starke always says, he goes, hey lexicon, do you happen to have a lexical item that matches this syntactic tree? And the lexicon looks into itself and says, oh yes, I do. This is a lexical item that has this syntactic structure, which is a perfect match for you for your syntactic structure, and just pronounce it men. Right. Okay, now, and how does it work when you have boy and boys? The crucial point is in the lexicon. Now, a lot of things are going to happen in the lexicon. Syntactic structure is crucially important, of course, but a lot of stuff happens in the lexicon. First of all, let's say, and that's important, in English lexicon, you do not have a lexical item that is able to spell a plural of the word boy. That is, I kind of expected that it would be like men, so I expected like bay or something, but it does not exist, right? The star here indicates that there's no bay. Hence, the lexicon does not have a lexical item that corresponds to this syntactic tree. But what it does is a lexical item boy with this structure, and then S, which just for the concreteness, we have as corresponding just a plural. Now, when we go to the syntax and put together the syntactic structure NP and the plural, then, as we know now, then the syntax goes to the lexicon and says, hey, lexicon, do you have anything I can spell out this syntactic, tree with? And then lexicon says, oh, well, not as a one thing, but look, I have a nice boy here and I have a plural. How about you put them together? And that's the way it goes.
Just read it.
Okay, lexical insertion is taken. Sorry, I'm concerned with time now. Sorry, lexical insertion is taken to apply to any node dominating a tree, matching the tree associated with the morpheme Q in the lexicon. This excludes mens. Assuming bottom of okay. Now the question is, of course, how come we don't get mens, right? How come we don't get mens? And we don't get mens because we have men. Because we have men, sorry. That'll have to help me here.
Go to the tree on the right.
So in the tree, right, yes. So when we build up this syntactic tree, then now you know what to do. Go to the lexicon, ask, hey, lexicon, do you happen to have something like that, which which spells this whole thing together. And the lexicon says, yeah, okay, I have this lexical item K bar men. Yeah, and so I know that what you did now, syntax talks to the lexicon, and the syntax says to the lexicon, I know that what you did to me before, you gave me a lexical item man and then s, but now I'm asking again, think again, do you have anything that fits this whole syntactic tree together? And lexicon looks and says, oh yes, well, wait, you know what, I do. And here it is. This is the syntactic, this is the lexical item man that spells these two features together. Take this, it's a better match. Okay. Right. This was talking about overriding. Now I see that question.
May I ask you a question just for clarification? So in nanosyntax, we are supposed to build one head at a time, right?
Yes.
And then you can have mens. But when you came to this entire structure with plural, you look another time. Yeah, you search in the lexicon another time, and then you can replace it.
Yes, precisely. Yeah. So you build up your syntactic structure, and anytime you add a feature, you go to the lexicon with the same question. Hey, lexicon, do you have anything that spells the whole structure? And lexicon says, either yes, I do have something that is a better match than what I gave you before. Use this. Or it says, hey, sorry, man, just give me some more features and build up more of your syntactic structure. Then I'll look again. And then it might be different.
Yeah, the thing is that syntax and lexicalization are supposed to go hand in hand, right? They work in parallels, cyclically, bottom to top, as you merge new heads onto previously built structures, right? So you first lexicalize the NP by man, say, and the number feature by S. Then you merge these two together, right? Form a phrase. And then you go to the lexicon again, as Lucie just said, and then, hey, you discover man, right? And that will override the choices you made previously.
I'll show you just a few examples of how this happened in.
Go to the Italian example.
Yes, no. Just first in Spanish, this is pretty much obvious, right? So for nanosyntax, the lexical features associated with the O for Spanish, this O is it's B is supposed to be gender. It's supposed to be beta, but then I forgot to change it. So
never mind.
Tarald will have beta.
Later, I love Greek letters. Yes, they look so scientific.
So for the masculine gender we have O. For the feminine gender we have A, and for plural we have S. And when you just build up, you see how it works, right? The interesting point is in Italian. How do we do that, right? So again, for the singular, we have masculine and feminine, spelling out just the gender features as expected. But for plural, plural masculine, we have the lexical item E, and it's a spell out of the whole syntactic of the whole tree. Both features in this structure, and the same for E, right? Now, we are at the end. So now we come to the point that we do not, we have generalizations for portmanteau morphemes, for men, basically, right?
And Italian E.
Yes, which are
and
also,
many more, actually.
This is the beauty of it, right? So you generalize. As opposed to DM, remember that we had to kind of do this weird look ahead, and we had to know whether we talk about men, and for that we have to do the fusion, or boys, for which we do not do the fusion, except that we had no way how to know that ahead of time before looking at the lexical item.
The system doesn't give us access to the lexicon book until we've done our fusion.
Yes. Now in nanosyntax, this does not happen. So we don't need fusion at all, right? What we need is access to the lexicon at each. After each adding feature, we go to the lexicon, right? And also, there's no need for fission. But fission is a kind of a counter.
It's used to split up one head into two pieces, right?
Yes.
And in all the cases where DM has to do that, that's because normally those two things are pronounced by a single morpheme, right?
Yeah.
Since a single morpheme only can lexicalize a terminus by assumption in DM, right? The two feature set must belong to a single terminal in the general case. But so when one half of the features is lexicalized by A and the other half by B, right? You need two terminals, right?
Yeah.
So therefore you need fission. In nanosyntax, you can say that in fact you have two terminals all the time, two heads, because each feature is a separate head. And most of the time, they are lexicalized by a single morpheme, just because nanosyntax allows a single morpheme to lexicalize a whole phrase, not only a terminal, right? And when DM would have fusion, you would just have a case where there is no morpheme big enough to match the whole phrase, right? As in the boys versus men cases. Huh?
Okay, so Tarald took over without me even
Sorry, I just so badly wanted to say that, right? Because the whole point of this is really that DM is forced to this funny acrobatics about fusion and fission just because they insist on the dogma that lexical items can only replace terminals, right? Once you give that up, you're free to fly. Yes.
We have two questions. One for me, first, is fusion ever optional? So that's the first one. Can I ever choose to fuse or not? And the second one is from Janaína Carvalho on YouTube. And she asked whether is it ever possible that we have two options. So a certain phrase can be lexicalized in two different ways. And how do we choose which lexicalization we are going to go for?
Are you asking that as an empirical question or as a theoretical question? That is, in the second case, the question would be whether or not our theory, say nanosyntax, allows for optionality once you've built a certain structure, right? And the answer to that, I think, is no, right? Right? So apparent optionality, now talking on the empirical level, if it exists, will have to be due to a speaker being able to use two different lexicon, as it were. One lexicon in which there is a portmanteau morpheme, like men, and another one in which there ain't one. And I actually know, some facts from my own native language, Norwegian, which might indicate that that possibility exists. So I think the question about optionality is sort of identical to the second question, right? So, theoretically, again, there's no optionality. Given a lexicon, the output, right, of the lexicalization process is entirely predestined, right? From the beginning to the end, just runs mechanically. There's no way you can choose between anything.
So no lexicalization will ever be exactly the same as another one. You won't ever have a lexical item that has the exact same structure as another one. Or
well, no,
here we go. Yeah, I don't know. That's a tricky question, right?
Yeah.
In a sense, depending on exactly what you mean, right? So, but in one sense, it's sorry. No. I mean, there cannot. I think. You mean? Are you the question is? Could there be one morpheme that sounds like man and is associated with the structure Lucie showed you, and another one associated with exactly the same structure but with a different pronunciation, right? Say bay or Lucie had. so that those two choices could alternate, right? I don't know, personally, I think the theory could not allow it, right? Because this relates to a bigger issue too, right? Notice that when you look at these trees, carefully inserted things like man and boy in big letters at the bottom, right?
That's the point, yeah.
Because this is driven by the need to keep men from lexicalizing cat plus plural, say, right? So you built a structure where you have an NP and a number, right? Because you want to say cats, right? But you can't, because you might imagine, because the structure you have built can its entirety be lexicalized by men, right? So that's an issue people actually have addressed both in nano syntax and elsewhere. So why doesn't the existence of men in the lexicon keep you from saying cats, which is kind of absurd, right? So one way of thinking about that is the features at the lowest level, what you call the NP, are such that they also identify different concepts, right? Assuming that the concept boy is different from the concept cat and so on. Yeah. So given that, I think the answer to the question whether you could, I don't think you could have two different sound bits, right? Lexicalizing the same concept, to put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, of course, it's about the concept, and we don't really have anything to say about the concept.
Yeah, we don't have anything much to say about the fine detail of it, right? But I would think that this is an assumption that practically everyone has to make, and so on. So if there aren't any more questions, we'll see each other in like 15 minutes, or
how soon?
How soon? How soon will we be? How soon will you be ready to meet again? 10 minutes? 15? 10 or 15?
15. Okay.
15. Okay, promise to come back. We will be badly disappointed if you run away now. Okay. Bye, see you later.
Okay, everyone. So we have a 15-minute break, 15 minutos de intervalo. Mas a sala vai continuar aberta. The room will be open. So if you want to stay here, we'll just stay here and wait. Lucy, if you want to close your video, you can at this time.
I muted ourselves, so I am preparing the Tarald slides, which are in what's called the PowerPoint, which are not PDF. But I want to check that that works too. Okay. So are the slides though visible?
Yes.
Yes, good. And again, I don't know, for these maybe I will try the slideshow, because then it will make the
Can you try going to the next slide just to see if it froze or not? Yeah, it works.
It works, but that actually is a because now I have two screens, and here it's really good that I see you. And on this screen, when I go to slideshow, then it goes to the presenter's view, and then here I have the slides which come next, and that's unpleasant. So I'll try to figure out how to make a slideshow without the presenter view. I see. No, it's just. No, that doesn't. Convenient. It's not convenient. This. Now that seems to. Nope.
Hello, we're back.
We are almost back.
Okay.
Tarald will be in here in a second.
Okay, let me just give a general notice for everyone. Pessoal, quem tiver questão de presença, se não tem certeza se registrou, se está com algum problema, inclusive o pessoal que talvez esteja no YouTube não conseguiu entrar no Zoom, mas se cadastrou para o minicurso, por favor, mandem e-mail para o e-mail do colóquio, e daí a gente orienta vocês pelo e-mail, tá? E não precisa preencher nada de lista de presença, a presença está sendo computada automaticamente aqui pelos participantes do Zoom, então não é necessário preencher nada, não tem nenhum formulário, ok? Algumas pessoas perguntaram isso para a gente, então, caso alguém ainda tivesse dúvida quanto a isso. E, por favor, chequem também a lixeira dos e-mails de vocês. Algumas pessoas que tinham recebido os links pelo e-mail para o Zoom, os e-mails foram para o spam. Então, caso você esteja assistindo no YouTube porque você não conseguiu entrar, não recebeu o link para o Zoom, por favor, cheque a sua caixa de spam também. Caso o nome de vocês não esteja aparecendo corretamente aqui no participante do Zoom, vocês podem se renomear, ou, por favor, coloquem o nome de vocês como vocês se registraram no chat. All right, if you want to start again, whenever
Ready.
you want.
I want to start now.
Yes, you do hear us, right?
I move
Yes.
using it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, ready to go. No, why doesn't it move?
It did. I don't know why. It does not.
Okay, it does. No, that's what we've
Oh, yes,
done.
we have done that. Sorry. Now, session 2, that's us.
Okay, so we talked about the Spanish and Italian adjectives and their endings, right? And the features entering into the derivations. But we didn't say much very explicitly about, well, we actually said something, right? I'll say it again, about how you build such structure and how lexicalization interacts with the, syntactic structure building. So again, to repeat what Lucie actually said, features are merged onto a root one by one, right? Actually, I should perhaps point out that unlike DM, right, nanosyntax does not think that roots are entered into syntactic structures directly, and only functional heads are lexicalized post-syntactically. There is no such thing as a root phrase as there is in TM. It's just features all the way from the bottom up. So when I say the root, I actually use that as a term, as a cover term for whatever features are lexicalized by the lexical root appearing as the first element of the derivation.
The idea of concept, right?
Or the idea of concept, yeah. So features, bearing that in mind, features are merged onto a root one by one. That's the usual assumption about syntactic structure building, right? At each step, lexicalization is attempted. But, sometimes the feature you just merged just can't be lexicalized because there are no morphemes that actually can do the job, right? So suppose you have built the structure you see in the middle of this page, with a gender feature M on top of, say, the adjectival root rojo in Spanish, right? Yeah?
So here's the root and here's the gender. So now you have the beta here.
Yeah. So the gender feature M that you just merged cannot be lexicalized by the morpheme you see here, the O, right? Why is that? That's because, right, let me repeat this is absolutely crucial. In nanosyntax, lexicalization only applies to phrases, to phrasal constituents. It's never, ever applies to heads, right? So in the structure we're looking at here with the M on top of roch, M is just a head, right? That's not a phrase, yes? So it can't be lexicalized as it is, right? So this is diametrically different from a DM. Not only do we allow morphemes, a single morpheme, to lexicalize a whole phrase, we actually only allow a lexical morpheme, lexical elements to lexicalize syntactic phrases as opposed to heads. Now, so in this structure we built here,
Sorry.
The M on top of roch is not a phrase, right? It's just a head, so it can't be lexicalized by this O, right? So we have to do something. What we do is use movement, right? So the movements we posit are basically to be thought of as syntactic movements. They fall into the same formal types as movement operations you're familiar with from, you know, mainstream syntax, right? You can raise a phrase into a specifier position, for example, and that's what we'll be doing all the time. So at this point, you know, when you merge the M, movement kicks in, moving a roch to the specifier position of the M, right? Now the M is now a phrase, right? It's dominated by the phrasal node beta here. It's a phrase all by itself once we've moved out the roch, crucially assuming that movement actually does not leave behind a copy or a trace, right? Right? Because then movement would still not turn M into a phrase all in itself, right? We could also assume that traces are simply overlooked by the lexicalization process because traces themselves need not really be lexicalized. But I'll just make the more radical assumption, namely that movement in this connection at least does not leave traces. So when we arrive at this stage, we moved roch across M. All of a sudden, M can be lexicalized by O, right? And that's what this equal sign means, right? The equal sign here means that the beta here has been lexicalized by O after we did the movement, right? You'll see this coming up all the time, the equal sign.
Sorry, technical question. I draw a little tree behind Tarald's back. Do you see it, or is it too far away? No,
it's too far away.
It's too far away. Sorry then.
Yeah, but do you get? I have the unfortunate habit of using label bracketing instead of drawing trees because it's so technically complicated. But can you sort of discern the tree structure looking at the way the brackets go? Huh?
Well, maybe.
Can you? This is a phrase, right? Where this is the main projection line and this is a specifier, another phrase, right? Within that domain, right? So it's a tree going like this. Yeah.
Well, I have a picture here, but you know.
Yeah.
No, you have to be careful.
If you stop sharing your screen, I think it will get bigger.
Yeah, right. Yes, that's true. No, but then you would not. It's a conundrum.
Wait, let's try to sidestep it.
I think you know it's just my idea that I don't like the notation. But
let's just check, right? Do you understand? Sorry, damn it. Do you understand what this is supposed to mean? Can you see the structures here? Yes? If you don't scream, right? Or say no, right? Otherwise, you'll be left hanging when I move on. Okay, then I go on. Now, the plural form, rochos, right? Has an S at the end. To get that S in place, we need another round of movements, right? So we've gone to the point where we moved the roch across the gender feature and lexicalized that as.
So you start with roch.
Yeah, that I said.
then you move the root across
We did.
the M, the gender feature.
We
then you
lexicalize that as
lexicalize the O. So then
And
it
now
O,
we get
and
to the
then
group.
now you put plural on top of that structure.
And we need to, remember, following the general rule, once we merge the feature, we try to lexicalize it, right? So we try to lexicalize this plural. And again, we're in the same situation, right? Suppose we have a morpheme S, which can lexicalize a phrase containing just the feature PL, plural, right? Now, the thing is, right after you merged PL, it's not a phrase, right? It's just a head. So we had to do movement again, right? This movement is going to be different from the previous. Well, it's going to be like the previous one. We take the complement, the structure that is the complement of the newly merged head, and move it to a specified position. So you get the whole thing, a rojo, a phrase, a big phrase, move to the specified position of the S, or actually of the plural. Then PL becomes a constituent, a phrasal constituent, right? All by itself. And you can lexicalize it by S, and lo and behold, out comes the plural form rojos, right? So now, in this derivation, movement applies twice to the complement of a newly merged feature. First time was once we merged the gender feature, we moved the root across that to the specified position. Then we did the same thing again, exactly the same thing again, when we had merged the S, right? So we took the complement of the newly merged feature and shifted it into the specified position. So that's what you see here, right? So that's a type of roll-up derivation, right? Which you might be, or a snowballing derivation, which you will have seen, for example, in Cinque's treatment of Greenberg's Universal 20, right? This is the way he gets the mirror order of demonstrative, numeral, adjective, and noun in languages with initial noun, initial noun phrases, right? You roll them up in this fashion. There's another type of derivation.
Can I?
Yeah.
So the basic idea is that you start with a let's say start with a root, then you put on the feature gender, right? And then you look at the gender feature here, and you ask a lexicon whether lexicon can spell out the whole thing. And the lexicon says, no, I don't really know what to do with this guy. Then to kind of rescue the syntax,
to help the lexicon,
to lexicalize. Then you take the thing that is at the bottom and you move it to the specifier position of that gender, right? So now you have the gender, and you, as you Tarald said, you don't think about the traces left behind by the movement, right? So you just keep it that way, and then you go to the lexicon and you ask, so do you have anything you can spell out this with? And it's a gender feature, and then the lexicon says, yes, yeah, well, I have masculine O, is that okay? And the syntax says yes, right? And then you put to this structure a plural on top of that, right? So here, this is the plural, and the same thing happens again.
Right.
Yes.
And
this is a question.
This is a question. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Sorry. Does the movement generate linear order, or is linear order something linear order?
Yes. We're Keynesians in that respect.
Okay. Yeah. And then I just have a question regarding that, because I think it's straightforward to see how this works for suffixes.
Yes,
but then with prefixes, I don't know if I'm jumping the gun here.
No, that's a brilliant question, right? So it's clear that this way of, portmanteau prefixes, right, cannot be derived exactly this way. Absolutely not, because the movement would, determine linear order. So this movement we've been looking at turns all affixes into suffixes. So this is a good point, and I'll come back to it in the very last section, actually, time permitting, right? We've actually have a paper on that, based on an investigation of the nominal, what is it called, class prefixes in Bantu languages, which are sort of like portmanteau prefixes, merging gender and number. I'm actually getting to it then. No. Now, if we look at the derivation of the corresponding Italian plural form by number features such as the E you see here on the screen, you'll see a movement of a different kind. This time we will notice that I'll point out what happens to you when we go on. So the E wants to lexicalize a phrase composed of a plural head and M, the masculine gender head. So what happens when we move plural on top of, so the first step, we get something, do exactly the same thing as in Spanish, right? We move the Italian version of ros across O, right, or clause M to the specifier position, and we get a rosso, right? Eventually, once the M has become a constituent. But then we move the plural on top of that. Now, Italian doesn't have a morpheme, right, that can lexicalize PL in isolation from M or F, right? There simply is nothing like the Spanish S, right, or Portuguese S. It's only the E you see here for this combination. And that E can't do anything once you merge plural on top of ros O, right? Because it doesn't form a constituent with O, right? To make it form a constituent with O, you have to move ros, right? Not ros O, but just ros. In this case, you move the specifier of the complement of the feature you move past, right? The specifier of the complement of PL is ros, right? You move that to the specifier position of PL, and you get a structure, which you see to the right of that arrow, in which PL and O form a constituent, right? And at that point, the E with the lexical entry given will kick in and lexicalize PL and O together as an E. I should point out that also the syntactic structure is visible at every level of the derivation, only even after you lexicalize that. So even though I write O here in the better phrase, it really means M associated with the lexical entry O, okay? But it's visible. So from this point of view, linear surface area roots and affixes are determined by spell-out-driven syntactic movement. Now we get to backtracking, and this is kind of interesting and slightly difficult topic. So derivation might reach a point where not even movement can help you lexicalize the head that you just merged, right? So here's an example, a sort of abstract example. So suppose you have a system, a lexicon, in which there are two morphemes A and B, right? Specified as you see them here. So, but there's no entry C that can lexicalize X in isolation from Y. Yeah, see that? So it's a little bit like the Italian plural E, right? You know, in the sense that PL can only be lexicalized in combination with a gender feature. So up to the point when X is merged, we get the following, right? So assuming that Z and Y merges before X, so the order of merged is Z, Y, X. So you first merge Z, and given the lexical entry for Y, for A, that's lexicalized by A. Actually, that might not be obvious to you because I haven't mentioned the superset principle yet. But we'll get there. The superset principle will say that Z can be lexicalized by A because the phrase Z is a subtree of the syntactic structure that the lexicon associates A with. And that allows A to lexicalize C. That's the superset principle, which we'll go to shortly. So you get Z lexicalized by A. That's what the equal sign means. Then you add another feature, Y, right? So now you get Y on top of ZA. And you notice that A has also Y in the structure associated with it on the lexicon, right? So A can grow. It can keep going and lexicalize the newly built structure. So we now get A lexicalizing all of Y plus Z, right? But then you add X on top of that. And now you're stuck, right? What's going to lexicalize X here? Given that there's no entry C, it doesn't help to move A across X, right?
Why not?
Because that would leave X stranded. It has to be lexicalized as part of that.
Oh,
But-
I see. Because there's no C.
Yeah,
This is confusing. I was confused.
No, there
Why?
is no C.
Because there's no C.
Yes.
There's no and not X and not C.
Yes. So at this point, wait. Yeah. At this point, X doesn't form a constituent with Y, right? Because the structure is X, Y, Z, right? Right? When we, look behind the morphemes, we have that structure. And there is no constituent matching X on top of Y, right? So YP, the complement of X, has no specifier that can be moved, and moving the entire YP across X does not create the structure where X and Y is a constituent. It actually creates the structure where you see the two S, Y, and X in red, and they don't form a constituent, right, in that structure. You agree? There's no constituent, no phrase containing just Y and X in that structure. Yes? So the derivation backtracks. It discovers that, hey, this doesn't work out. Let me try again. And the derivation goes back to the step where you added the Y, right? So we undo, forget about what you did up to that point. You start again, adding Y on top of A, lexicalizing the Z, right? And now, instead of letting A grow to lexicalize Y as well, right? Which would be the optimal choice if things went well, it moves ZP equal to A across Y, right? So you get the structure you see at the bottom here, where the phrase CP with A in it, it's a specifier of Y, right? That's the same thing we did before, right? Already a couple of times. Now Y is a constituent, a phrasal constituent. And when you merge X on top of that, right? You can lexicalize X, provided you now move just the specifier of the complement of X, that is the CPA, across X. So you get the structure to the right of the arrow, in which X and Y form a constituent, right? And now you can lexicalize X together with Y by the B. Yes?
If you go back to the lexical features.
Yeah.
Lexical features.
You see that? Right? This is the B. I should perhaps say that, no, I shouldn't. Yeah, I should say, you might wonder, right? Given that this guy, the B, has X in it, right? Going back to the step at the bottom here, right? If we moved A across X at this stage, right, we would get a constituent containing just X, yes? So why can't we lexicalize that by B, given that X is actually part of the structure that we have associated with B, right? B can lexicalize X, E. And I just said the thing about, B can lexicalize the Y in isolation from the X because the phrase Y is a subtree of B. So why can't it also lexicalize the X in isolation from Y? And that is when X becomes a phrase, right? X becomes a phrase when you move A across it. But X is not a sub-phrasal tree. Oh, beta, right? In the structure assigned to beta, to B here, the one with X in red, X is just a head. It is not a phrase, right? So there's no much between the phrase, X as a phrasal constituent, and the X here, which is just a head. Yeah, that has the consequence actually. If well, let me skip that, right? If any subtree lexicalized by this must contain the lowest element in the tree. You can think about that and figure it out at your leisure. I just mentioned it by now. Now we move on because time is pressing. So we've looked at backtracking, and backtracking is one of the set of rescue operations, right? We're assuming that everything must be lexicalized. And once you merge something, you must be able to lexicalize it and try to lexicalize it immediately. When that fails, when you have to do something, there are rescue operations. And they come in a ranked order. So we're starting with, so the first thing you do, you merge a feature X and you try to lexicalize it. If that fails, and actually it will pretty much almost always fail, right? You go to C, right? You try to move the specifier across of the complement across the newly merged head. That's what we did a lot, right?
Here,
when we did that.
and then you move
Yeah.
across the specifier.
You move the specifier. And if that fails too, right? Then we move the complement of X. The reason for ranking C across option D is that basically it involves moving less structure. But, you know, I've never been convinced completely that that is right, but I'll go with the standard view on this. And then only if both B and C fails, you do backtracking, right? So backtracking is the worst option, something you do only if everything else fails, okay? Is that clear? Questions at this point? It's useful to bear these things in mind because at some point we'll actually get back to backtracking. It does some wonderful things occasionally. Here's the superset principle, which is sort of a backbone of nanosyntax. It looks like the exact opposite of the subset principle of DM that Lucie talked about before. So in DM, a morpheme can lexicalize a constituent that is bigger than itself. In nano, a morpheme can lexicalize a constituent that is smaller than itself. So here goes, a morpheme A with the entry, oh, misspelled, it should be Y at the end. A replaces T, can lexicalize a syntactic structure S, yeah? If and only if S is identical to a subtree of T. Remember that everything that will occur to the right of the double arrow in a lexical entry will be a syntactic tree, right? Yes? The lexicon, in a sense, stores syntactic trees in lexical entries, yeah? So that's the superset principle, right? It just means, in a certain sense, that a lexical item can lexicalize everything of which it is a superset in terms of the number of features contained in it. This is a subset principle, which we looked at before. So maybe I won't spend much time talking about this, but instead rush on to the next. Here's the distribution of a morpheme A with a lexical entry in 9, if we assume the superset principle, here abbreviated as super P, right? So suppose the syntax build all the 3 trees in...
Well, first suppose that this is the lexical entry, right? This is the lexical entry.
Yeah. This is a lexical entry, but was going to say that after.
Okay, so,
I'm looking at 10a actually.
okay.
Okay, so we have 3 different syntactic structures, right? In usual syntax, these can all be built, right? As let's say manifestations, projections of the functional sequence, especially if you're a cartographist, right? Start at the bottom and you add new features one by one, all of them privative rather than binary. So if you start with C, you know, just put one feature in place. Then you build a slightly bigger structure by merging Y on top of that, and then a third yet bigger structure by adding X to that again. So you got 3 structures. Now suppose you have the lexical entry in 9, right? So which of these 3 trees in 10 can be lexicalized by A? The answer is all of them. Why is that? It's because each of the 3 trees in 10 matches a subtree of the structure associated with A in 9, right? The one at the bottom here in 10C matches the smallest subtree ZP in the structure, right? They're exactly identical. The next one up, YZ, matches the middle light P in 9A. And the biggest structure, 10A, is an exact replica of the whole thing.
And I think there was a question.
Is there a question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Taka asked whether 10 is the representation of polysemic items. For example, the verb put. Teresa. Taka.
Polysemic items.
Yeah.
Yeah, the verbal lexical item such as put
has many meanings. You mean like
we can treat this as a polysemic behavior?
I have no good answer to that. Nobody in this line of business has ever thought much of it as far as I know. At least if they have, they haven't told me, right? I personally have never wondered too much about that. I get dizzy whenever people start talking about polysemy, and I know it's an important issue, but I have no way of dealing with it. So question is, should they be treated as, yes.
And I have a second question. That's assuming A can lexicalize all these subtrees, assuming that there is no alternative.
Oh, no, there are alternatives. This is not the only pattern you can get from these 3 structures, right? So I'm moving to that now in a second. So if you bear with me, I'll just move on, right? So we have now seen that if the lexicon contains an A specified as a 9, this A can eat all the 3 structures in 10, right? That's clear from the superset principle. So this is actually an interesting way of dealing with syncretism. The fact that if you look at the case paradigm, for example, like in particular our colleague Pavel Zaha here has done in great detail, and you look at the cells of the paradigm, right? You discover that the same shape, the same morpheme, same ending can occur in more than one single cell, right? But following certain patterns of syncretism, which is actually the topic that is the backbone of Pavel's dissertation from some years ago. Now, here we see how this might happen. If you build these 3 structures, right? And have just this single lexical entry in 9, then you'll get an AAA type of syncretism, essentially. Think of these heads, for example, as, say, collections of case features, right? Assuming different cases to be decomposable into smaller features, identifying things like accusative, dative, genitive, and so on. So, right, this might be the dative, this the genitive, and this the accusative, for example, right? You get an AAA syncretism across 3 cells in the case paradigm. But what if the 3 structures we just saw are not in fact lexicalized by the same morpheme A, right? That's the question you're asked. So suppose, for example, we get A for the biggest structure, but B for each of the two remaining ones. That's an ABB pattern, you might say, right?
That presupposes that you have the B lexical.
Yeah, I'll get there.
Sorry.
The B, as Lucie pointed out, only appears at the bottom of the page, is this one. But since A occurs here on the top, we must have the same entry we had before. We must have an A big enough to eat all of this, right? Because otherwise this wouldn't match a subtree of A, right? Which is this, yes? But then by the super principle, A also should be able to occur here and here, as we saw, because these two guys are match subtrees of the structure. That's what we just saw. So why does B with this entry, smaller than this one, appear instead for 11B and 11C? Why don't we just get A all the way through? And here's the answer. The answer comes from another important principle of nanosyntax, namely nanosyntax version of the elsewhere principle, from now on abbreviated as EP. Here's what the
And we talked about it at first.
You talked about it before, and I'll say it again because this is the nano version of it.
Yeah.
The previous one was a DM version. Nano has its own version of everything, because we essentially turn things upside down with respect to certain traditional frameworks. So the elsewhere principle says if two morphemes A and B are both able to lexicalize the syntactic structure S, but the distribution of B predicted by the superset principle is properly included in the distribution of A, then B wins. Chew on that for a second. I know it's a mouthful, but will perhaps become clearer when we try to explicate it a little. So what the elsewhere principle says is that when two morphemes A and B are both available for insertion at the same syntactic node, right? The more specific one of the two is preferred. And this is the link to the DM version of elsewhere. The more specific one is preferred. Taking out more specific to means having a more limited distribution. And having a more limited distribution here actually means having a more limited distribution predicted for it by the superset principle. Now, it's easy to realize from what we've seen that this guy, the A, will be allowed by the superset principle to occur in a wider range of cases than B. Because whereas, if we go back to this, for example, whereas A is big enough, right, to lexicalize all three structures in 11, B is only big enough to lexicalize the last two. Because B, as we see down at the bottom of the page, has no X in it, right? Because B, unlike A, has no X on the top, it's not big enough to eat all of the structure in 11A, right? Because the whole structure in 11A is not the subtree of what you see in B, right? Obviously, right? But it is a subtree of what you see in A, right?
No, in B,
which has the X on top. Now, the other two structures are small enough that both A and B can lexicalize them, right? But you see in what sense the superset principle taken by itself predicts a larger distribution, says that the distribution of B is properly included in the potential distribution of A. The distribution of A allowed by the superset principle is all the three structures in 11A, whereas the distribution for B predicted by the superset principle is only BC, right? A subset of ABC. Yes? Is that clear? So the superset principle says that when this relation between two morphemes applies, then only B can be used, right? So again, going back here, only both A and B are available for, say, 11B, as far as the superset principle is concerned. But B has a more limited distribution than A because it's smaller than A, right? And therefore B wins, right? And if it wins for B, it will win all the more so for C, right? So B blocks A by the elsewhere principle for B and C, right?
How about minimize junk?
No, I don't like that.
Yeah.
Say.
There was a question from somebody else.
Yeah.
Would 11 be the case of, for example, A being something like arise and B being just rise?
Oh, I see. No, these.
The case of
so arise and rise, like rise, intransitive, and arise. No, arise.
You mean the two verbs rise and?
Yes, for example, like.
Is there more than one verb? You mean raise and ride? No. No. Oh, you mean let's take a paradigm, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I try to think of a strong verb. Those are good for these things. No, let me give you one. It's actually not an example I would want to use, but I'd use it anyway. Take bring, brought, right? Starting with the infinitive / present tense, bring, and then in the past tense and the participle you have brought, right? So that looks like this pattern, right? Yeah. You get A in the present tense infinitive, and you get B, that is brought in the two remaining structures. So if we're assuming that the right structural relationship holds between the structure underlying the infinitive and the present tense and the structures underlying the past tense and the participle, then we could get the bring, brought pattern in that way, right? By, for example, saying that bring is A and brought is B, right? Yeah? So God, I'm pretty much out of time, but I think I'm almost there. So
we don't have to. I mean, is that necessary that we go through that today now, or we can just go through the leftover?
No, I just want to finish this.
We actually have some time because we got back from the break at around 9:10.
Yeah, actually.
10:10 actually,
I'll
our time. So we have some time.
I really want to, finish this while this is still sort of fresh on your brain, right? So we're now going to look at how many different patterns of lexicalization do we predict for a set of structures like those you see in 11A, B, and C, right? Structures which grow from the bottom to the top, right? By cumulatively adding new features, alias heads, right? We've seen that you can get an AAA pattern, right? The first one we looked at. You can get an ABB pattern. And we saw how by appealing to the elsewhere principle and putting that together. We can also get a paradigm where the root shows up in 3 different shapes. For example, sing, sang, sung, right? So at least 2 of the 3 roots are portmanteau, right? Sang lexicalizes the conceptual root of sing, right? Plus the feature past, right? And sung, the participles, let's say, has that feature too. It's the past participle plus the feature participle. Don't take these particular choices of names for the features too seriously. They're just convenient abbreviations for whatever is actually going on down there, okay? Or, all of this calls for more precise semantic characterization, obviously. So, but given this, since each feature corresponds to a syntactic head, we have the following structure, right? Showing you the structure for infinitive. Minimally, we have this past on top of that, and then part on top of that again, where the heads occur in the order in which they are merged, right? From bottom to top. Can then assume that a verb like sing, sung, sung can be associated with 3 different roots. Say sing, as you see it here. Now, these entries will generate the sing, sang, sung paradigm, right? In infinitive, the sing is just big enough for V alone, by the top structure. And by the elsewhere principle, it will block sang and sung for this minimal structure, because sing has a more restricted distribution than sing, sung, sung, which could also have a lexicalized V by the superset. Yes. Now we get to the past tense structure, then only sang and sung are big enough for the structure, because sang and sung are the only ones that have the head past in their structure, right? Yes? Yeah? So they are the only ones of which this structure is the subtree. Yeah? And sang will block sung by the EP because basically the participle is bigger than sang. Sung is bigger than sang. It has the part on top, right? So you get sang in the past tense. And finally, when it comes to the structure of the participle, only sung is big enough, since sung is the only one that has part in the structure, right? So you get sing, sang, sung. In general, a series of structures like this can give rise to the following patterns. So we have looked at the AA, the AAA pattern. We have looked at the ABB pattern. We've seen how that comes, so I don't want to dwell on it. The ABB comes out in this way. You have an A, which is big enough for both the past tense, for both the middle structure. This one you see in the middle, the Y on top of C. And too small for the biggest structure, which has X on top of Y. Yeah. Wait, no,
You moved up.
I moved up.
Now you moved
No.
back up.
Yeah. So that's how you get AAB. You also get ABB. That's what we just saw, right? It's the bring, brought pattern. Yeah. And ABC, we also just saw the sing, sang, sung. But this is, completely generalizable. Every time you have reason to assume that there is this kind of relation between 3 or more structures, right? You expect the possibility that one of these patterns can come out. It all depends on what the lexicon contains, right? So that's, again, sort of one way of saying what Lucie mentioned before. In this approach, the lexicon drives everything, right? If the lexicon has only one relevant morpheme, you get AAA. If it has 2,
Lexicon has only A, then you get AAA, right?
Yeah.
Then
if it has this, you get ABB. AAB. If you get that, you'll get ABB. And to get ABC, you have that. Yeah? Is that clear? So the lexicon sits in the driver's seat here. Now, here we come to a point. This is the infamous ABA pattern. Have you heard about this? This is something Jonathan Bobolik has been going on with in ages, right? And actually, it's also discussed and explained in a very elegant way in Paul Zacha's dissertation on case from a Mannala syntactic point of view. So the fact of the matter is, if you have three structures ordered like that, you'll never get the pattern ABA that you see there, with the B splitting the two A's. This is sort of a subcase, right, of a more sort of general or an idea which actually goes back in time. That if you look at paradigm cells, you can see syncretism spreading across adjacent cells in the paradigm, right? So syncretisms live across adjacent cells in a paradigm, right? The ABA pattern is a violation of that. Lucie?
No, I just wanted to say, to make it more concrete and remind you of Bobalik's examples, right? So he based his idea that there is nothing like ABA pattern based on the paradigm for adjectives. So it's the case that when you have an adjective like a positive form and then the comparative and then a superlative, it's always the case that the comparative, that the superlative is based on a comparative.
Which
very often it's just that AAA, that they look exactly the same. But if there is a variation, then it's always the case that the superlative is based on the comparative. In other words,
it's my turn. In other words, there's a good, better, best pattern, but nothing like a good, better, goodest pattern or something like that. Yeah. So you can't. Thing is, nanosyntax doesn't allow you at all to derive an ABA pattern from these three structures. It's impossible. Why? Well, first of all, we need an A which is at least as big as you see it in the middle of this page, right? It must be big enough to eat the entire biggest structure, X, Y, Z, right? Yes? By the superset principle. And to get B in place, lexicalizing just Y and Z, we need B equal to Y and Z, right? Then it would block A, right? When it comes to lexicalizing just Y and Z, yes? By the elsewhere principle, because B is smaller than A, right? It has one head less on top, yeah? So that's true. Moving from the bottom up, right? We get A in place for the biggest structure. We get B replacing A for the second largest structure, blocking A by the elsewhere principle. But then what happens when it comes to the smallest structure, which is just the Z? Well, the thing is, by the elsewhere principle, the B, which is smaller than A, will block A for just Z as well, right? I'll repeat. So we're looking at the smallest structure, just the phrase Z. We're asking ourselves, which one of A and B should be allowed to lexicalize C? Well, what does the elsewhere principle tells you? It tells you got to choose the one of the two that has the most restricted distribution, which for all practical purposes comes down to saying you have to choose the smallest one, right?
Well, it also goes by a slogan, minimize junk.
Yeah, but don't listen to her. I hate that slogan.
Minimize junk. Use as little, the smallest structure you can.
Yeah, forget about it. It's not nice. The other one has a nicety that it actually turns it into an elsewhere principle. Anyway, and it links us up with Panini and other notable figures. So it comes to A. B is smaller than A. It can lexicalize Z, right? Because Z, the phrase Z, is a subtree of the structure of B. So B is chosen by elsewhere, blocking A, right? So the pattern that can come out of this is not ABA. A cannot come back for the smallest structure. It's blocked by B. So all you can get from this is BBA, not ABA. Yeah? You can chew on this during your coffee break and ask me again if it's still unclear when you come back, right? But it's just counting on your fingers. You know, you compare two entries. The lexicon does that all the time. You can do it too, right? So lexicon's puzzle looks at the structure. See, I had two guys who can do that job. Which one should we choose? Well, the lexicon says, we'll pick the one which has a more specific distribution, right? We pick the smaller one. Then that is B, right? So B wins. Or if you go by Lucie, the lexicon would say, well, I want to be as economical as possible. So let's take the one that doesn't come along with too much junk, right? The cheapest one. Yes. Okay. I hope to see you again in 15 minutes. So enjoy your coffee. And I actually wish I could have had Brazilian coffee with you, but I'll do my best here in pest-struck in Borno with what we have. See you in 15 minutes, right? PB!
Hello.
Hi.
Whenever you are ready. I'm gonna mute you just a second. I think you can unmute yourself now. Can you try?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
Now,
Okay, now we go. Time
wait,
is
wait.
flying.
yes. I'm not sure that we share the slides.
And we have to, I think you
Yeah.
do that. You are screen sharing it. So.
Yes.
We can see the slides, yeah.
Yes, good.
Yeah,
good,
yeah,
good.
you
Then-
can see
then
the
we go.
slide. Then we go. So, allomorphy. So,
Oops.
from a nanosyntactic perspective, right? NS standing for nanosyntax. Allomorphy, as you've seen, is really just a matter of the relative size of competing morphemes, of competing lexical entries, bigger and smaller. So if A in a cell X in a paradigm is replaced by B in another cell Y, it must be the case that the structure corresponding to cell Y is bigger than the structure corresponding to cell X, right? There is no such thing as context-sensitive allomorphy in nanosyntax. Everything follows from the size of lexical items, the size of the structures associated with morphemes in the lexicon. So here's an illustration, right? The paradigm we just looked at, the sing-sang-sung paradigm, assumes that the structures grow, right, from the infinitive to the past participle. In that case, you start with one feature head, D in the infinitive, add another one to get the past tense, and you add a third one, part, to get the participle, right? And that creates enough space for a variation with three different roots of different sizes, right? Now, what does this predict for weak verbs in a language like English? Weak verbs being those that have a dental suffix written ed, both in the past tense and in the participle. Presumably the same morpheme, both in the past tense and the participle, right? Yes? Like work, worked, worked, yeah? These verbs never show any root alternation of the sing-sang-sung type, yeah? Which is actually as expected on the nanosyntactic view, assuming that the ed, written ed, the dental suffix, actually lexicalizes the two head, the structure formed by part on top of past, right? Right? Remind you by the subset by the superset principle, ed can then occur both in the past tense, which has only passed, and in the participle, because the head past you see here is a substructure of the structure associated with ed in its lexical item. It matches a subtree of ed, right? Yeah? So you get it in both places. But because of this, right, the root actually lexicalizes exactly the same substructure in all three forms. So work, work, work. Why is that? Because the root has to stop lexicalizing before it reaches the head past, right? Otherwise, there wouldn't be a dental suffix ed, right? You see that? To make room for ed, the root has to stop going upwards, to put it that way, when it reaches the head past, right? So in other words, follow from that the structure lexicalized by the root in a weak verb like work, work, work is exactly the same structure in all three forms, right? That because the complement of ed, the structure just below the head past, is just the structure d, right? Yeah, what you see here. Remember, we built the structure. Go back again. These are the structures, right? You start with a V, you add one feature and you add a second one. If you strip off past and part past, you get V, right? Yeah? Now, in the present tense, you have just V because you add nothing on top of it. In the past tense, what the root lexicalizes is just also the V, right? Because the past head is lexicalized by ed, right? Likewise, in the participle, the root only gets to lexicalize the V again, because part and past both are taken care of by ed. So the root lexicalizes exactly the same structure in all three forms. So work, work, work. So there is no room for variation, for allomorphy, reflecting competition between morphemes with different sizes. Right? This is unlike the sing, sang, sung paradigm, where you can say that sang is bigger than sing, sung is bigger than sang, right? There's just one size fit all, right? And this predicts directly that there can be no allomorphy in weak verbs like work, work, worked, because there's not enough, let's say, structural space for competing morphemes of different sizes. Now, it's interesting that DM doesn't seem to make the same prediction. So in DM, root alternation in strong verbs is typically accounted for as an instance of contextually determined allomorphy, unlike what it is in nano. So you might have, informally speaking, statements like the following: replace sing with sang in the context of a T with a feature past. Replace sing with sung in the context of a T with the two features past and part. That gives you sing, sang, sung. If you add C, which says spell out the T with a feature past by 0 in the context of a verbal root belonging to a special set of verbs identified here by the superscript I, basically diacritic, right? DM likes diacritics. We don't much. But the thing is, there is no principal reason why the statements A and B must go along with the statement in C, right? In fact, there's no reason why you couldn't have just A and B, all right? Without C, in which case you would have A and B for some verbs, some class of verbs like sing, but you would still have leave the T to be lexicalized by ed rather than zero, right? So you wouldn't get sing, sang, sung, but you could easily get something that would be like sing, sang, sung, right? By this algorithm. See what I'm saying? If you allow the variation between sing and sang and sung to be just conditioned by contextual allomorphy in this way, contingent on the feature content of T, right? Yeah? There is no way you can have a principled explanation for the fact that you don't get sing, sang, sung, essentially. Yeah? But of course, in nano, there is a clear reason why you can't have a D suffix on top of sing, sang, sung. It's because there are three roots, sing, sang, sung, to lexicalize increasingly big portions of the structure, and therefore they will swallow the pieces of the structure that would otherwise have given rise to the ED morpheme. So it's all for free. Here's another example of the same sort from Czech. In Czech, most adjectives form comparatives the way you see it in 39. So you get mili and milejší, right? So milejší seems to be composed of 4 bits, right? The root mil, as in mili, then a, then sh, the s with a funny thing on it, and then an agreement suffix, e and y, the long e, are both agreement markers. Now, some adjectives have a shorter comparative form. So take starý, old, has the comparative starší with no a, right? It lacks the a in between the root and sh that you see in milejší, right? In that sense, it's shorter. Yes, that clear? When you compare starší and milejší, you see that one piece of milejší is missing in starší, namely the a piece, right? Now, the interesting fact is suppletive roots occur in some comparatives, like dobrý, lepší, which is like good, better, right? But here's the crucial observation. Zaha and others point out that suppletion of this sort, like dobrý, lepší, right, only occurs in short comparatives. That is the ones that don't have the infix a, right? The ones, in other words, that are like starý, starší, and not like mili, milejší with the a in between. Yes? Yeah? Now, why should that be? Here's the explanation offered by Zaha and company. The regular comparative is 2 heads on top of the root, the adjectival concept, if you like, leaving now out the agreement marker. So milejší is decomposed the way you see it, right? You add a on top of the root, then you move it across the head, which is lexicalized by the s, and you get milejší. Then you add an agreement morpheme like the long e, and you get milejší, right? And in this case, the root just lexicalized the a part, right? The conceptual content of the adjective, yes? While x and y in this structure are given are lexicalized respectively by ish, the sibilant, and by a, right? Yes? So there are structures where each piece is lexicalized by a separate morpheme, right? And crucially, the root only gets the smallest part, the conceptual content of a. Roots like star and the root of starý, old, are bigger. That's why they don't have the a in the middle between the root and the sh. So if you say that star as the entry you see here, that it eats y in addition to the a, you have derivations like you see here. You add y on top of star, having lexicalized the adjective. Star goes on lexicalizing, right? So it eats the y and you get the whole Y phrase lexicalized by star. You add X on top of that. You move star across X, and star X lexicalizes by the S as before, and you get starshi and the end. Like, so you get starry starshi, the sort of example of short comparative. Now you can say that an adjective like dobrý, which goes dobrý in the positive, but lepší with a different root, lep, in the comparative, actually has two roots. Dobr is the smaller one, it lexicalizes just the adjective, right? And lep is a bigger one. It's like star in the sense that it can also lexicalize the head. That would otherwise become a, right? So that gives you the facts, right? So the thing is that if we go back to something like mil, in this structure, when the adjective is followed by a, the root only lexicalizes the a part, right? So there is no room for, different roots of different sizes, because the domain left to be lexicalized by the root is the same in the comparative as in the positive, namely only the a. Whereas with a starší verb, that's not the case, right? And that opens up for two different roots like dobr and lep, right? And so the generalization that no adjective can have a root in the comparative different from the root of the positive if it also has the suffix a, right? Is actually exactly the same reasoning as that applied to the weak verbs we looked at before. The fact that a verb which adds the suffix, the dental suffix in the past tense and the participle, just doesn't have enough room left for variation between roots of different sizes. Yes? Again, this compares favorably with what the DM analysis might say. Because, well, a DM analysis might say that suppletion, say, dobrý lepší, is triggered by the morpheme lexicalizing the X, that is the sh, and it's local to the A in the sense that it must be string adjacent to A for suppletion to kick in. In other words, if a root is separated from X, the structure lexicalized by ush, by the intervening a, right? Yes? Then the root and the ush are not close enough, they're not local enough to one another for suppletivism to be possible, right? This is a type of derivation actually invoked a lot in some interesting work by Andrea Calabrese, for example, on Italian and Latin. So you might have something like you see here. But notice that the assumption of locality, this strange kind of locality, really, because actually, structurally speaking, right, the root and the ish would not be structurally adjacent, even if you don't pronounce the Y. That is, if you have a zero lexicalizing the Y, as typically DMers would, right? So it's not a question of structural now adjacency, that's just surface phonological adjacency. So it's really radically different, say, from certain notions of locality and syntax, for example. But in any rate, the locality condition on suppletion within DM must be stated as an independent principle, stipulated. Whereas, as we've seen actually in and nanosyntax, no such stipulation is really necessary. The fact that you don't get suppletion in the presence of A just follows from the fact that below A, there's not room for any variation, structurally speaking. And also, by the way, a DMer would still be confronted with a question, why no variety of check has suppletion triggered by the Y, that is the thing lexicalized by A, right? That is, yes. Which again doesn't arise on the nano account. So here's two backtracking in ABA. Oh, back to two favorite topics. I talked about backtracking before, and I talked about ABA before. Now I'm talking about backtracking again in relation to ABA patterns. The ABA patterns I'll talk about will be of a special kind. They will be not of the same kind that those that I claimed earlier cannot actually be built in nano. So here's two crucial properties of Germanic words. And by Germanic, I'm now gonna mean mostly Norwegian, but what I'm gonna say will extend to other Scandinavian languages as well. So the dental suffix D appears in both the past tense form and the participle of weak verbs, but never in the past tense form or the participle of strong verbs. That is sing, sang, sung. As in English, there's no dental suffix at the end. And the root vowel may change across the series infinitive past tense participle, usually distinguished by upload, right? Or apophony of strong verbs, sing, sang, sung. Now, from a nano perspective, it's natural to link the fact that strong verbs don't have the dental suffix to the fact that strong verbs exhibit root alternation, right? So again, for a verb to show root alternation, there must be 2 or 3 different roots of different sizes, right? So this is basically the sing, sang, sung story again. So I don't want to go through it because you already know it. Now, to prevent the dental suffix from occurring with strong verbs, we may then posit the dental suffix is now represented as this T, right? Without intending to make any deep phonological claims about its phonological nature, is taken to lexicalize two heads X and Y. And I'm sorry I chose that. X and Y really means past and part, right? So think of Y now as part, the one that occurs in the past tense. Past, I mean the one occurs in past only, and X as the one that turns the past tense into a participle. Yeah, the X here. So this captures the fact that T occurs both in the past tense and in the participle of weak verbs, right? So, les, the root means read, actually. So you use that to lexicalize, the verbal root. So you get les. Then you add the Y, the past head, and you get lest, right? Y is lexicalized by T because the phrase Y is a subconstituent of the structure of T, right? It's the lowest subtree. Then you add an X on top of that, X meaning participle. To get the participle, you move the root that's not shown here across that too. So you obtain a constituent built by X on top of Y. And again, the T will lexicalize the whole thing. Again, because it has this big structure in its lexical entry. It's allowed to lexicalize a phrase composed of X and Y. So a strong verb, however, might have roots like this. So that's again sing, sung, sung. The sing would be just the verb. The sang would be Y plus V, right? And the sung would be X, Y, V, right? And notice that if that is true, the root in this case lexicalizes the heads, X and Y, that would otherwise have given rise to the dental suffix, right? So if the roots are this big, there can't be a dental suffix, right? they are taken by the root. Chew on that a second. Do you understand this? So it's a matter of the size of the root. The size can swallow up a thing that would otherwise have been spitting out the teeth, right? So in that sense, right, the fact that strong verbs have root alternation and the fact that they don't have a dental suffix, right, correlate, right? They have root alternation because they have 3 roots of different sizes, and those sizes are such that they are roots that will eat up the 2 heads that would otherwise be lexicalized by T, right? So normal weak verbs then, by contrast, would only have a single root A, bottom of this slide, so that T will kick in both the past tense and participle. In other words, the morpheme that lexicalizes the V part of the structure will not also eat the X and Y part that give rise to T, right? But the particular analysis we now have to unify the T of the participle with the T of the past tense, namely the lexical entry for T you see at the bottom of the screen, T lexicalizes X on top of Y, actually fails to entail what you see in 1. The dental suffix appears both in the past tense form and in the participle. That's weak verbs, or neither in the past tense form nor in the participle, strong verbs. This is why that fails, that entailment fails. Suppose we have roots like the 2 you see at the bottom of this page. So as before, we have an A, which is just big enough to lexicalize the V. And then we have a B, which is slightly bigger, in addition to being able to lexicalize the V part. It can also lexicalize the head Y, which would give rise to T, right? The dental suffix in the past tense. Yes? Yes? In that case, we get the root A in the infinitive / present tense and B without T in the past tense. So this is the past tense fact, right? You have Y merged on top of a structure, on top of V, which has already been lexicalized by A, the smallest root. Now, when you merged Y, then this B, you see on the right here at the bottom, with Y in it, can lexicalize the newly merged Y. So at this point, the root B takes over from A, lexicalizing B in addition to Y, right? So we have started to derive the beginning of a pattern, A-B, right? And there's no dental suffix in the past tense because the root has eaten the dental suffix. But what happens when you add the X of the participle on top of what we now have, right? So remember, you add the participle head, X standing for participle, on top of the structure you have from the past tense, on top of the Y. So when the derivation has run up to the Y, we see that it has produced what you see on the top. It has produced a Y phrase lexicalized in its entirety by B, right? Without any movement or anything, right? But now you're stuck, right? Because this thing with Y lexicalized by B really corresponds to the structure you see on the right of the equal sign. It's a strictly right branching structure with 3 heads, one on top of the other, right? Yes? And only, yeah. So X cannot be lexicalized by T here because to be lexicalized by T, it would have to form a constituent with Y, but it can't do that in this structure because here there in the structure you see on the right of the equal sign here. The right branching structure, there's no constituent, right, containing X and Y. X and Y do not form a constituent here, right? They are just the two topmost heads of the right branching structure. So X cannot be lexicalized by T, and it can't be lexicalized by B either, because B is too small. It doesn't contain the head X in its structure. Remember, B is like that. You see about that. It lexicalizes everything up to Y, but it doesn't go on to X. Yes? So we have a problem. Movement doesn't help. There's nothing we can do to do it except backtracking. Huh? You know, the last choice option. So we backtrack back to the point where you added the head Y on top of the verb lexicalized by A. And now again, this sounds like something I said before in another connection. Instead of lexicalizing this whole thing by B, you move the constituent V lexicalized by A across Y to its specified position. So you get what you see in the derivation there, right? At which point Y becomes a phrasal constituent containing just the head Y. And this can be lexicalized by T because, again, the phrasal constituent T, oops, you see it here, is a subtree of the structure associated with T in its lexical entry. So I know that's no use. The one at the bottom there, right? So by the superset principle, T is allowed to lexicalize just the phrase Y in isolation from X. So now we can go on. When we merge X on top of this, we just move the specifier of the complement of X, that is the phrase containing, smallest phrase containing the A in red, across the X to the specifier position again. And whoops, we have a phrasal constituent containing just X and T, right? At the bottom of that tree to the right of the arrow. And now since
like here.
No, before that. No, like there in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
There you have X and T at the bottom. That's a constituent, right? And that fits the structural description of T, right? X on top of T, where T actually is Y lexicalized by T, right? Matches exactly the structure associated with the dental suffix T, right? So the outcome predicted is actually this pattern. Present tense A, past tense a B without the dental suffix, and then in the participle again, the dental suffix comes back, but the root is not B, but A, right? So in that sense, it's an A-B type of root variation, right? But it arises just because the A in the participle actually is forced to lexicalize a structure that is smaller than the structure lexicalized by the root B in the past tense. And it's a good result that this happens because there actually are quite a few Norwegian verbs that follow this pattern. So one example is the Norwegian verb meaning hang. It goes henge, hung, hengt, right? What you see there is the root in this case, the infinitive, and the participle is heng, same root, right? But in the past tense, it's hung, and hung doesn't have a dental suffix, right? But the participle hengt does, yes? Yeah? So actually, this extends to all types of structures, sort of gradually increasing structure sets, right? You can always have this scenario. It all depends on what the lexical entries look like, Yes. You always have the possibility that the set of lexical interests relevant to the set of structures happen not to include one big enough for the biggest of the structure, right? Which was the case here. Oh, that's it. Is this too early? What time is it?
It's okay, actually. If we have our break now, we will finish around 1 p.m. here.
Yeah, and again, I mean, we should have some time for questions. So, you know, I hope you again don't hesitate to interrupt and ask questions as we go. I would hate it to discover afterwards that you've been left hanging somewhere in the middle, okay? I think these things are really quite simple, but I realize it takes some time to sort of process the derivations and the technicalities and the fact. So whenever you run into trouble on that score, just let me know and we'll step back and try again, okay? So see you again in 15 minutes. Yep.
See you. Welcome back.
Here we go.
Thanks.
You hear me? You see the screen? Yes?
Good.
Then we start. Up. No.
No, we don't. Okay. Now we start maybe. Yeah.
Wait.
Yes.
You see those? Yeah? Yep. Okay, so I talked about the root alternations in connection with the dental suffix in Germanic languages before, the work, worked, worked paradigm. And I pointed out that on nanosyntactic assumptions, there can be no root alternation in this paradigm, simply because the root lexicalizes exactly the same structure, right? In all three forms, namely what's below the head that lexicalizes as T or D, the dental suffix. But actually there is, right? So I mentioned the bring, brought paradigm before. Then I pretended, well, this is a strong verb, and maybe it is, but it's not in Norwegian, I think. So here's the Norwegian version of that. You got several of those, right? So you have the Norwegian bring, which goes bringe, brakte, brakt. Nice to hear some Norwegian spoken, right? And smøre, meaning smear, going smøre, smurte, smurt, right? Both of them with the T dental suffix, both in the past tense and the participle, right? Nevertheless, you get an alternation between roots, right? You get the green root in the infinitive and actually the present tense, right? Which would just add an R at the end of the infinitive. And a different root, the red ones in both the past tense and the participle. Now, there's a way of looking at this which links it to the fact that Norwegian weak verbs, that is the ones with a dental suffix in the past tense and the participle, actually come in two different varieties. So one type is the one exemplified by the verb meaning throw, is there, which goes kaste infinitive or kaster with an R at the end in the present tense, and then has the E also in the past tense, and the participle actually both kastet, right? With an E between the root and the T. Whereas the other class, exemplified by the root meaning read, les, also has an E in the infinitive and the present tense. So here you see only the infinitive, but you get the present tense by adding an R at the end of that, leser, right? Which looks like kaster. But the lese, read type of verbs, lose the A in the past tense and the participle. In those forms, with those verbs, right, the dental suffix joins up directly with the root without any vowel in between. So you get leste, lest, yeah? That's different from English, right? When you can't actually tell from the pronunciation, right? although bring, brought actually in English might actually belong to something like the second one of these two classes of weak verbs in Norwegian. Now, the interesting fact is that only the second type of weak verbs, that is the weak verbs without the vowel in the past tense and the participle, allow for the root alternation we're talking about. That is the bringe, brakte, brakt type of alternation, the A, B variation. So there's no pattern like the start one you see, where you have two different roots, A in the present tense, but B in the past tense, and the participle where there is an E between the root and the dental suffix in the past tense and participle. That's the basic fact. Is that clear? Yeah? That's a rock bottom fact. There is absolutely no exception to that generalization. Now we're going to try to deal with this, right? Both see how we can get the root alternation fact with the class of verbs that have no A in the past tense and the participle, and why we can't get any root alternation with verbs that actually do have an A between the root and the T in the past tense and the participle. So here goes, right? As a starting point, let's assume that the A that you see in the present tense and also in the past tense and the participle of the first class of verbs, that is throw type of verbs, actually lexicalizes a special head, here abbreviated TV, standing for theme vowel. Theme vowels are, of course, a familiar type of animal for people who have studied Romance languages and Slavic languages too. And, you know, reason to think that Germanic languages also have theme vowels. In fact, there are Scandinavian varieties other than the one I'm talking about right now that have a much more complicated system of theme vowels. But we'll stick with this version of Norwegian that happens to be my own version of Norwegian, in which there's only one theme vowel, namely the E, which I take to be the morpheme lexicalizing TV. Notice here the equal signs is used just coincidentally instead of the double-headed arrow, right? That's normally used in lexical entries. So this is meant to mean, this is intended to mean that E can lexicalize the structure, the phrase consisting just of the head TV, right? And T is, as before, right? It's a morpheme that lexicalizes a complex phrase consisting of two heads, part and past, right? Because it occurs both in the past tense and in the participle, which has an extra feature part on top. So here's how you get the derivation of the past tense form of verbs that go like kaste, right? The first one of the two paradigms at the bottom of this page, the one that has A in the past tense and the participle. So the derivation is like this. You get, if you, provided, actually you assume, I actually left that, yeah. I think I left that out, didn't I? So let's assume that the verb, the root kast, right? Let me throw in that, as I should have written it down, has a lexical entry which allows it just to lexicalize the phrase consisting just of the V, the root part of the structure, right? It's really small, yeah? Yes? It doesn't extend upwards from the V, right? With the effect that when you add TV, the TV must be lexicalized by something other than the root, right? Because the root isn't big enough to swallow the TV. So the root moves past the TV, creating a phrasal constituent containing just TV. And that constituent can be lexicalized by A, right? Given the lexical entry that allows A to lexicalize a phrase consisting just of TV alone. Yeah. So at this stage, you get cast A. Then you add the past head on top of that. Now you move the whole complement of this new head past across it. And then you get past as a phrasal constituent containing only itself, right? And you can lexicalize it by the T, because the phrase containing just past is a subtree of the tree corresponding to T, right here. See that? So by the subset principle, T will now kick in and give you kastet, right? In the past tense. Simply because the root cast isn't big enough to eat the theme vowel, the TV. And and you get the participle the same way, given what I said about T being big enough to lexicalize both just past by itself and the complex structure consisting of part on top of past. Yeah. So you get casted both in the past tense and in the participle. Now, what about the verbs that don't have an A in the past tense and the participle? Those would be like les. Let's look at those again. Like the second class of verb, the read type of verbs, where you see that the root has no A between itself and the dental suffix te, right? You see that, right? So why is that? Well, we could assume that, actually we will assume that a root like les, which has no A in the past tense and the participle, is actually bigger than the other type of verb roots, right? In particular, say a verb like les, which goes lest, the lest in the past tense and the participle, is big enough to eat the theme vowel, right? When the root is big enough to lexicalize the theme vowel, there will be no room for the dental suffix, right? The root will eat what you would otherwise use the dental suffix to lexicalize, right? It will swallow the position where you would otherwise put the T. So in that case, you get again the past tense of a root with an entry like the one you see for les would go like this. You add the TV on top of les. Now the root les lexicalizes the whole thing. So the whole phrase is lexicalized by the root. You get les. You add the past had on top of that, and you do the usual thing. You move the root to the left of past, creating a phrase containing past, and then you lexicalize that phrase by the T, and you get lest, right? Yeah. With no A in between the dental suffix T and the root, yes? Because the root has eaten the source of the A, yes? So we have two types of roots, small roots and bigger roots, bigger in the particular sense that they also swallow up the theme vowel, in the sense that they lexicalize the piece of structure that would otherwise be lexicalized by the theme vowel A. And that gives us the paradigm you see at the bottom here, provided, of course, that is leser, les, the les, right? Provided that a root like les is somehow prevented from lexicalizing the TV in the present tense too, right? Because in the present tense, we actually do see an A between the root and the R, right? Exactly as in the other class. The present tense form is leser, right? With an A between the R, the particular marker of present tense, and the root les, yeah? So if the A in the present tense, leser, is also a spell out of the head I call TV, the theme vowel head, TV. And the root les is big enough to eat that head, as it does in the derivation of the past tense and participle forms. Then the question arises why it doesn't also eat the a in the present tense, right? Giving you lesser or something like that, yeah? So here I'll just wave my hands a little because I have no really convincing answer to that. I'll just make an assumption and see what happens if we do make that assumption, right? So the assumption is that something, somehow, God's hand or whatever, prevents the root that big, which could in principle lexicalize TV, from doing so in the present tense. So I'm positing a distinction between the present tense derivations of the present tense forms and the derivation of the past tense and the participle forms, namely that a root that can eat the TV nevertheless doesn't do so in the present tense form, only in the past tense form and the participle. And you're really entitled to be skeptical about that. There are ways of tinkering with the structures to make it happen, but I won't spend time on that now. And instead point you to an interesting consequence of making that assumption, which is again that a root like this, les, the one on top here, eats the constituent TV in the past tense and the participle, but not in the present tense. Yes? For whatever reason. Now we have a way of catching the alternation when we're talking about, which is this, the Norwegian version of the bring, brought alternation. The ones in the middle of this page, bringe, the root bring alternates with the root brak, right? Get bring in the present tense and infinitive, and you get brak in the past tense and the participle. We notice now on the basis of what we said that in fact, when you look at it, the root bring occurs only when you also have the e, right? As in the present tense, bring er, right? With e. But does not occur, you get brag instead, when the past tense form, in the past tense form where there is no e between the root and the participle, dental suffix. So that suggests that you can get the bringe, brakte, brakt alternation by positing these two rules. Lexical entries you see here. You have one root, bring, which just lexicalizes the V, and one that lexicalizes TV in addition to V, right? What does that lead to? In the present tense, you would have this, right? So you first lexicalize the V by bring rather than brag. That follows from the elsewhere principle because bring is smaller than brag, right? And then you put TV on top of that. Now, if you're in the present tense, again, for some reason we don't really understand, you don't allow the root to lexicalize TV, even though in principle it could, given its lexical entry. So brag will therefore not override bring in this derivation, because for brag to override bring, brag would have to lexicalize TV, but we already stipulated that no root can lexicalize TV in the present tense, right? Huh? So what you do instead is you bring across TV and lexicalize TV by e, and you get correctly bringe, bringer, right? Infinitive and present tense form. In the past tense, however, you are allowed to use the root to lexicalize TV if you have a root that's big enough, yeah? Like les. Yes, yes, I'm hearing you.
I was wondering, would brag have a pointer to the structure of bring, or are they totally different lexical entries?
Wait. Did I hear the word pointer mentioned here?
Yeah.
I see that. Yeah, you're an advanced student. Well, yes. I mean, it's true. You might actually need to say, again, it's like the why doesn't men love cats, right? In a sense. So yeah, there are two ways, right? You could actually replace V here by something standing for the conceptual concept, which we might take to be common to bring and brag, right? Like we did with men, man. Or you could have a pointer. In fact, the latter has been suggested by Pavel and others. Pavel Saha, I mean. In fact, I think in the paper about adjectives that I mentioned earlier, right? So Pavel suggests at some point that maybe what you really would want in a case for brag is to place a pointer from TV to the lexical item bring, right? Yes? We could do that, but that would be perfectly compatible with what I'm going to say next anyway. But you're right, we might want to use a pointer.
It's a possibility.
Eh? That...
It's possible, but not the only way.
No, it's possible. It's just that I wanted to sidestep the issue at this point, right? Because if I were to start explaining the concept of pointer, right, we would need another 4 hours, I think, to go through all the consequences of introducing pointers and that.
You might mention shortly, what does that mean for other people?
Yeah, I might mention it shortly. So a pointer is a thing that makes reference to the previous introduction of a specific lexical item rather than to a structure, basically. And no, I don't want to go beyond that, really, because it's really a complicated issue and it has a lot of interesting consequences. For one thing, it was discovered that actually when you use pointers, and if you do something quite clever, I don't know, yeah, you will actually generate ABA patterns in multi-dimensional paradigms. Of course, pointers were specifically invented for multi-dimensional paradigms, right? If you have portmanteau morphemes lexicalizing case features on top of, say, gender features or number features, both, you actually have a many-dimensional paradigm, right? And the thing is, there can be gaps, right, in between the gender features and the case features, and so on. And to capture syncretisms in such paradigms, Pavel Saha and Marina Pancheva, once upon a time, I think 8 years ago or so, invented the technology of pointers, which was very clever. But then we discovered that actually, given, when embedded in the then current theory of nanosyntax, would actually predict a certain class of ABA violations in those paradigms. And since then, things have been going back and forth. How do you get that? Yes. So, yeah, it's a highly relevant question, but I just don't want to go into it. I was actually planning to talk about pointers just because of the ABA problem earlier. And also because I was the guy who discovered that it gave rise to ABA patterns, but now I don't want to do it. Okay, so we'll move on, be patient. So this is how. So this is how we might get the bringe, brakte, brakte alternation, right? The Norwegian version of the bring, brought, brought alternations. It's actually also how we might get the bring, brought, brought alternation in English, hanging on this crucial assumption that nothing is allowed to lexicalize the theme vowel in the present tense. Yeah, this is it. Yeah. I'm not gonna run through this in detail, but let's take the first bit. So we have bring, having lexicalized V because it's smaller than brag. You put TV on top of that. Now you're in the past tense, so you can allow the root to lexicalize TV. In fact, you do have a root big enough, that's brag, right? Which lexicalizes V and TV together, overriding bring, right? Severing the link between the V and the, lexical address of the verb, of the VP. And that will give you brakte in the past tense and brakt in the participle. No, I'm starting going backwards. Now this pattern, and that's the more interesting part, where you have root alternation in a pattern where the vowel A, the theme vowel, occurs between the root and the T, is now excluded because the structure below the A, the TV, is exactly the same in all three forms, right? That is just the V, right? So past TV, if you get A in the past tense on a participle, that means that the root lexicalizing V is not big enough, right, to also lexicalize TV. And so it's going to be the same size of domain lexicalized by the root, namely just the V, as the domain lexicalized by the root in the present tense, where nothing is allowed to lexicalize the TV. So we can't get any alternation, since alternation depends on a difference in size, right, between the domains of structure lexicalized by the roots. A DM account of these facts. Again, this would be repeating what I said before about locality. To explain why you can't get the pattern where you have two roots, A and B, and nevertheless have A in the in the past tense and a participle, might be locality. That's what I said before in connection with the Czech adjectival, the relation between the positive form and the comparative form of an adjective in Czech. So I just want to repeat that the arguments against invoking locality are just the same as before. So here we go. No weak verb has three distinct roots. So you can go A, B, B with a dental suffix on both B and on B, but you can't go A, B, T with a dental suffix, both in the past tense and the participle. That follows too, because in both the past tense, right, and in the participle, the T starts lexicalizing structure at the head we call, well, sometimes Y and sometimes past, right? The lower one of the two heads, participle and past, right? So the structure lexicalized by the root and the participle, when both of them have a dental suffix at the end, is exactly the same again. It's the complement of Y/past, yeah? So we can't get this paradigm, the start paradigm, with three different roots combining both of them with a dental suffix, right? This follows, yeah, as I said before. So ABCD cannot be excluded in a principal way in a DM account again. And I think you'll guess why. And I think I said that before too. So I'll move on again. And now I get back to a question asked before. What about portmanteau prefixes in this type of framework? So remember I said that Nothing can lexicalize the M in the structure you see here, where the gender feature comes on top of the adjective, because it's not a phrasal constituent, so we have to do movement. And then we come to the fact that the gender feature and the number feature are lexicalized by single morpheme together in Italian, like the E lexicalizing both the number feature plural and the gender feature M. But it can't do so, I said, if the structure remains as what you see at the bottom here, with a right branching structure with two heads, PL and M on top of ROS, because PL and M don't form a constituent in that structure, right? Because of the adjectival root at the bottom. So movement must apply, as we saw before, right? You move the adjectival root across M and then across the plural morpheme, and you end up with Rossi, right? Because you created this phrase at the end consisting of the plural head and the gender head, right? And that spells out by the E. So this movement, as was pointed out before, of course, turns affixes into suffixes, because we really hang on to the idea originally due to Kane, right? That the structure created by movement determines linear order. But then what about prefixes? It would seem that there should be no language with which portmanteau morphemes actually have prefixes. In other words, there should be nothing like an inverse Italian, like the one you see at the bottom here, where the O, the A, the E, and the E precede the adjectival root, right? Yeah?
Because they cannot be spelled out in nanosyntax. Hence,
in nanosyntax, they can't, so
yes.
There shouldn't be one. But what if there are such portmanteau prefixes, right? And in fact, there do seem to portmanteau prefixes. This is the story why you can't have inverse Italian so far. We're saying that if you don't do the movement, you have these structures, right? In this structure, the number feature and the gender feature don't form a constituent, right? And since a single morpheme can only lexicalize a constituent, in particular only a phrasal constituent, right? Then the prediction is that these two heads cannot be lexicalized by a portmanteau morpheme in the structure. In fact, the prediction is that they can't be lexicalized at all because they're not phrases. But in fact, there seem to be portmanteau prefixes. So now we turn to the nominal class prefixes you see in Bantu languages, where the shape of the class prefix, right, seems to be determined both by gender and number. So here's this, an extract from the pattern from Gosa, a language we've spent some time on. So you see that 2 dimensions seem to be involved, or actually in most analysis of these 2 dimensions are involved, both gender and number, as in Italian, right? A versus E. So in the singular O, what's called class 1, you get the prefix m. The vowel preceding that you should ignore. It's just some kind of a determinal-like element that can drop in given syntactic context. So we're now focusing on the parts of these structures that are put in bold, right? So, and you see that a noun like person, ntu, takes the class prefix of class 1, m, in singular, so we get mtu, right? And takes the prefix ba instead in the plural, so we get umtu, abantu. Actually, now you know where the name Bantu comes from. And that looks like, and in another class, right, with another gender, you get C in the singular, like isikolo, school. But you get a Z with a voiced sibilant in the plural, easy color schools, right? So that looks pretty much like, say, Italian, well, O in the singular, E in the plural, right? A in the singular, A in the plural, right? So we can take these class morphemes to spell out the combination of a number of features and gender features. In fact, most mainstream analysis, not all of these facts, do precisely that, right? But then it seems that we have the kind of animal we would not expect to see, right? Because these would be portmanteau prefixes, which are nevertheless prefixes, right? So there's a way of getting around it. If you take this to mean, right, to be prima facie evidence that you can't restrict lexical insertion to constituents, right? Because remember, that's the claim that keeps these two guys from being lexicalized by a single morpheme when the structure looks like this. That is, a morpheme must lexicalize a constituent because they are not constituents here. If you give up the plain claim that morphemes can only lexicalize constituents, you might get this fact for free. So there's a version of, say, related to nanosyntax called spanning, often actually goes back to Edwin Williams. So a span is defined as a sequence of terminals, like x1 to xn, say, in a syntactic structure, such that each x sub I c commands the next guy on the list, that is x sub I plus 1, and there's no terminal y in the structure, such that x y c commands y, and y c command x y plus 1, right? So there can be no y intervening between two adjacent members in a span in the structure. That's essentially spanning in a nutshell, right? Notice that in this approach, you say that a single morpheme can lexicalize a span, but a span is not necessarily constituent, right? Yes? In fact, in this structure, M taken to lexicalize a span of this type, a number feature and a gender feature, and ba and c, so on, could effortlessly apply to these structures, because even though the two features in red do not make up a constituent, they nevertheless make up a span, right? The number feature C commands the gender feature, and there's no other head in between, right? So there are spans, and on spanning assumptions, they can be lexicalized by a single morpheme, even though they don't, form a constituent together. But it's not really obvious, right, that the correct structure for the Bantu class prefixes is like this, a strictly right-branching structure in which the number head and the gender head actually just occur on the main projection line of the root, right, the M. Yeah? In particular, it might be, right, the correct structures would actually group the terminals, the gender feature and the number feature together as a constituent, forming a specifier on the main projection line. That would give you structures like this when you say an A and B. The part in red here is a constituent and is represented as being a specifier of the head noun nku, right? Occurring on its projection line, right? So this is not a strictly right branching structure. In fact, it's right branching, strictly right branching only inside the specifier phrase, right? And the gender feature and the number feature form a constituent and hence could be lexicalized by a single morpheme, even on strict nano assumptions, which hold that only a constituent can be lexicalized by a single morpheme, right? Notice before we move on that there is a problem with these structures. which might be a problem. I just add that because Lucie and I, together with a guy called David Langa from Mozambique, who wrote a paper about this. And there we discussed this issue. So the problem is that nominal functional heads like singular, number heads, and gender heads are generally assumed, right, to merge, in fact, on top of a noun, forming a strictly branching extended projection. That is, they are supposed to grow on top of an N, right? And now.
And then they go, wow.
And then they go like this. So there's general assumptions about functional heads and their relation to lexical heads, to, you know, draw that distinction, would actually demand that the structures be like this. Like these structures at the bottom differ from the one higher up by having an N, the one in green, right? A second N at the bottom of the specifier, yes? So on this view, the plural and gender thing are really on the functional projection line of this green N, rather than on the functional projection line on, you know, the lexical, and you see the unto, right? A consequence of doing that is that you'll have to say that the morphemes occurring as nominal class prefixes, now going back to our paradigm, the and the ba and the c and the z, we have to say that they also lexicalize the extra n in green you see here, because if they didn't, the number feature and the gender feature would not make up a separate constituent, right? They're packed into a larger constituent with an n at the bottom. So again, on the assumption that you can only lexicalize constituents, whatever lexicalizes the number feature and the gender feature together must also lexicalize the n in green, right? So in other words, the outcome of this is sort of like saying that, so they must have entries like this. The M has associated with a structure, including an N at the bottom, the one that was marked in green before, right? And lexicalize the whole thing. So in other words, like saying that the class prefixes in a Bantu language like Xhosa actually contain a silent noun, as it were. It's silent not because it's no, but it's silent because it's lexicalized by the same morpheme that also lexicalizes the gender and number features, right? I'll be back to you in a sec because I'm done in a sec. So in other words, that's the claim. That's the claim actually Lucie and I and David Langa defended in the article which was published in 2018. We argued that this N should be seen as a type of classifier. And we presented a number of facts that seem to us to argue in favor of that hypothesis, that that actually is the correct analysis. Now I'm done, and you can ask your question. Tell me.
Sorry, it's a question actually from our chat, from Janaína Carvalho. She asks, some languages have very idiosyncratic nominal classes, like prefixes that only occur with plants or with dangerous animals.
Yes.
We could hardly say that dangerous animals corresponds to gender as we normally conceive this category. How to deal with this phenomenon?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I should point out really that once you make the move that Lucie and I and David Langa did, that is assuming this, what you see at the bottom here, it turns out really that you don't really need to posit gender at all to distinguish the different class prefixes in Bantu. it's enough that each class prefix makes reference to a particular distinct individual
Concept.
N, a concept N,
Yes.
at the bottom of the specifier. So you might assume that the N in red, N sub 1, means something different, right? Has a different concept from the red N4 here, right?
Which seems to be the case.
Yeah. And what prefix you get will actually depend on which particular N you have under the number feature in the structure, right? Because this guy, for example, the N, which has an entry with N sub 1 at the bottom, now to be understood as a specific concept type of noun, could not also lexicalize, say something with N4, right? The other red N at the bottom, because then the two structures wouldn't be identical, right? Yes? So it turns out that we do this in class that actually it's not clear that at least a Bantu language like Xhosa actually needs gender features to make things work out. From that point of view, we wouldn't really need to say that the women and other dangerous things class, or whatever it was, actually belongs to a specific gender. We'd only need to say that there is some concept they have in common, which can be, syntacticized as a noun, an N, that can occur at the bottom of a specifier structure similar to the ones we have here. And we also, actually, I think we made a similar point in connection with the fact that some of the Bantu class prefixes have a kind of double life, right? They occur as the regular class prefixes of a certain set of nouns, like class 1 nouns, for example, all of them have this. But some of them have a second function. They can also be used to form things like diminutives, augmentatives, and just pejoratives from nouns that actually doesn't belong to the class of nouns for which the prefix, this particular prefix would be the regular class prefix, right? So in other words, they have a double, like, you could put it this way, they seem to look both like derivational suffixes sometimes when they are pejoratives and so on, and as, inflectional in the sense, so regular class morphemes viewed on a par with the O and the I and the E and the E of Italian nouns and adjectives, for example, right? So our view ended up being that actually we realized at some point that adding gender into the mix was actually seemed redundant from once we've added the N here to the mix. Yeah. Could do all the work that the gender would actually do.
In other words, the gender actually is the concept in a way.
Yes. So yes, that would be our response to that.
There's one more question.
Yeah.
We should stop.
Yeah.
It's the same person. She complimented her question. I think I'm gonna read it out loud for the recording.
Yeah.
So just for the recording on YouTube. Since this noun is present, can we have any syntactic reflex of it? For example, can something modify only this specifier formed by singular gender and the new noun?
Modify, you mean, can we add a modifier like an adjective inside the specifier to lexicalize it, to modify it?
Yes.
So we could add, say, good inside the...
Yes, to detect that the actually, I suppose, whether you can detect that the actual noun that we posit here, that it is actually there?
Well, actually, yes and no, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, the fact is suppose, I mean, clearly something like tu here, or easy cola and so on, they can be modified, right, as a whole by modifying adjective, relative clause. Actually, adnominal adjectives are really mostly just relative clauses in this language. And the thing is that the agreement on the modifier will always correspond to the prefix, to the class prefix. The class prefix is what determines concord, right, inside a noun phrase. Now, if we're gonna say, like we hinted earlier, that there actually is nothing like gender in Bantu. In particular, we would say anything that ordinary, the nouns you actually see in these forms, like tu and kolo, actually have no gender, right? Then the only source of concord would actually be the classifier, the specifier, right? The thing that corresponds to the class prefix. So in a sense, if you sort of take the concord fact seriously, it might actually look as if, right, any attributive modifier you attach to these things, to tu, is equal, and so on, actually in a certain sense modifies the specifier, that is the noun and the specifier with things on it. Huh? I don't know if this will really make sense if we look at all the possibilities, especially at the semantic consequences of saying that, right? It's a question which is hard to put to the test, because so far we have just very vague general conceptions about what the precise meaning of these little silent nouns we put inside the class prefixes actually is, right? They have to be fairly vague, right? In some sense, fairly general. Sometimes not so very much so. For example, well, class 1, right, is typically called the class of human beings, in the sense that, not in the sense that every noun denoting a human being is put in class 1, but most are, and almost all nouns in class 1 actually denotes a human being. There are a handful of little odd exceptions, which at some point, I mean, the word for train, I think, for example, is in class 1, a subclass of class 1.
Oh, that's,
yeah. But apart from that, it seems like it's a human being class. And maybe that has something to do with the N inside the specifier, because it's not so that unto itself needs to, denote a human being, right? Well, at least in the combinations that occurs in, it can combine with
class 14.
Yeah, class 14, you get Ubuntu, which doesn't denote a human being, but actually does denote, right, behaviors typical or recommendable for human beings, right? Humanity, in other words, and so on. Yeah, I'm done, I think. Are you done? No, I can take more questions. But, I'll propose a deal, right? When we're done.
We are done.
Yeah, we are done. We could actually post our presentations someplace where you can access them.
Yes.
Then you can peacefully read through it and refresh your memory. And you will
I
also have our email addresses, so you can send us questions, and we'll be happy to answer them.
I promise that I'll also post a list of literature,
Oh, I forgot that. The literature list is very important. We'll do that. Then maybe I'll meet some of you again on Friday, right? I'll give a talk there. And I promise you that I've think I indicated I'd be talking about Germanic verbs, right? I already did that. So I think I now instead will talk about Portuguese verbs and take, profit from the possibility to have you guys pointing out to me the wrong data that will occur. We'll see how it goes. So you'll get Portuguese verb paradigms and a particular syncretism pattern for root alternations in Portuguese. Okay, so see you then, I hope, and take care.
Okay,
And
thank you. Somebody had actually asked for the presentation, so that's awesome that you offered to make it available. We will most likely post it on our website, I think. But yeah, I think if anybody has any further questions, we can refer them to you as well.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Because it was a lot to digest, so sometimes it takes people time to process it.
Take your time, chew on it, and whatever you come up with, steer it our way, and we'll respond. Particularly Lucie will.
Thank you very much for such a long session. We really appreciate it. It was awesome. I think everybody profited a lot from it.
Yeah, take care, be careful, have fun. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Ik